Good morning, everybody. The webinar will begin in just a few minutes. While waiting, I do encourage you to download the handout that's available under the Handouts tab on the control panel. It will be referred to during today's presentation, and we encourage you to take notes during the presentation. While we wait for the webinar to begin, we do have Molly Katz online with us. Good morning, Molly.
Good morning, Patrick.
Question for you. Since the pandemic, obviously we've seen many teams start working remotely. Once the pandemic ends, do you expect to see this trend to continue?
I think we definitely will, but certainly not to the level so we've seen it. And one of the things I'll talk about during the webinar is like different reasons for why people would be able to make the choice about working remotely or not. But I think that a good number of companies are finding that it's working. I looked at something, I got something in my email just yesterday, as a matter of fact, from Gallup, and they talked about, they had surveyed workers in a whole variety of different areas. Now, clearly a lot of blue collar workers, essential workers, people who are in retail or places where you physically have to be on the job are certainly going to be on site. But they found that in a lot of white collar areas, there's still, as of April, about 80% in some cases of people are still working remotely, and about 40 to 50% of people think that this trend is going to continue on. Where they're seeing the most still working remotely and seeing that carry on for the future in areas where people work on computers, or they do something, whether they're physically working on a computer or their job is in technology. I talk with a lot of people as part of my consulting work. I talk with a lot of people in a whole variety of different industries throughout the country, and I'm finding a trend more and more from employees who are saying, you know what, I made it work and I really enjoyed it, and this is something I want to continue. And it's particularly in fields where you see people doing things like, technology. The Gallup poll also talked about people who work in life or physical science, even, and this one was surprising to me, but even in the arts and creative arts. But I suppose one of the areas they referenced was around design and media. And so that's something that you can certainly do, remotely. And also with financial services, real estate, and consulting, they're predicting that this could be a trend for anywhere between 50 to 80% of workers going forward.
Wow. Yeah, I guess we'll wait and see.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we are right at 11 o'clock. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Leading Your Remote Team. Since we want to continue to deliver these informational webinars for you and continue to practice social distancing, we are delivering this webinar remotely. Your presenter, Molly Katz, will be presenting from her office and me from mine. My name is Patrick Allen. I'm the program manager for Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development's public open enrollment programs. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the world. We offer training as public open enrollment programs currently being delivered live and virtually via Zoom, and also customized programs delivered live and virtual at your location. I am joined today by Kent State Facilitator Molly Katz. I will be serving as your host, and Molly will be our presenter for today. Molly has over 30 years of experience working in human resources in corporate and manufacturing settings, and as a learning and organizational development consultant and coach. She has depth and breadth of experience developing employees, leaders, and teams from both within and outside of organizations. Before founding her own learning strategy and business coaching consultancy, Molly enjoyed a positive and lengthy career working for the Lubrizol Corporation in various HR roles. She supported employees and leaders at all levels with talent and organizational development, change management, team development, and coaching. Throughout her career, she has used her extensive global talent and human resource experience to partner with business leaders to support their strategic goals in all areas of talent management. Molly earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in communications and completed master's level coursework in the area of counseling and human resources at John Carroll University. She also has certification and deep experience with a variety of behavioral and developmental assessments. Everyone in attendance today has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the over 100 registered participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions to me in writing using the Questions tab on the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to Molly as time permits throughout the webinar. There is a handout available to you that summarizes today's presentation. It's located under the Handouts tab on the control panel. We encourage you to download it and take notes during today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email next week with a link to the recording after we conclude our time together. And now I'd like to introduce Molly Katz.
Great, thank you, Patrick. I'm really excited to be here today, virtually with everyone. Thanks for sharing my background. One thing that's not mentioned in my background is my experience working on remote teams. Didn't just start, what's it been, about 14, 15 months ago, like most of the world. I've worked on remote teams through my work at Lubrizol for many years. So I've been in a remote office, off of the main corporate facility. I've led teams where we've had people in different locations, and I've been a team member on global teams. And so remote teams aren't something that's new and different to me. So I'm excited to be able to talk about this concept that it's still, even though a lot of people right now are thinking remote teams aren't as relevant because so many people are going back to work on site, but remote teams are still something, as Patrick asked me early before we started there, are something that's still going to be something we see going on in the future. It may not look the same as what we're seeing right now, but remote teams are going to be something that we're all going to be dealing with going forward. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to be partnering with Kent State on this program. So let's talk. So as I mentioned, the concept of remote teams is changing. If you think about it, 14, 15 months ago when the pandemic hit, we all had to kind of very quickly shift to remote work. And everybody had to do, pivot was that big word that everybody heard about. We had to pivot to people working at home. And we made it work. So many organizations probably were very surprised at how well they were able to make it work. But there were also some things that we found that maybe were a little bit more challenging. So as things are balancing out now, as there's opportunities for people to come back into a physical office, as there's opportunities for people to make choices, and organizations to make choices about how they set things up, the pendulum is swinging back, and organizations are making decisions about what that remote workplace will look like. In some cases, they're going to be all on site. They're going to be pulling people back together and saying, we want everybody physically on site. And we'll talk in just a moment about what are some of the decisions that an organization and a leader needs to make in order to determine what is that best fit. Does it make sense to bring everyone on site? Some organizations are completely remote, and they have people working remotely just by the nature of what they do. Even in this past year, I think we've seen that different organizations have made that decision. My son works for a company that does background checks on employees, and they used to have 2 floors of a building downtown Cleveland. Everybody went remote, has been working remote, and the organization decided, why are we spending all this money on office space, having employees come in, and all the other expenses that go along with that? When they work very independently, they work on computers, and so they made their entire concept is now virtual, and so everybody's working remote. So they made that pivot to having all of their employees work remote. But what we're seeing a lot more these days is a hybrid. And so you've got some employees working remotely, you've got some employees on site, or you might have something where there's a flexibility, where you might have some employees who come in certain days or certain shifts, or you come in for certain functions. You know, today we need people to come in and brainstorm, and we physically need to have people on site and do that. And so organizations will be making decisions about what is best for them. And those of you who are on the call today may be in positions where you're making decisions about your team and trying to determine what is going to be the best fit. Should we be bringing people into the office? Should we be having people work remotely? Or are we going to find some sort of balance of what works? One of the key messages in this remote leader program that we do is around finding what works best for you. There isn't one size fits all. And as a leader, you need to be thinking about some different aspects of the work that you need to do in your overall situation when you make those decisions. Sometimes, you know, when you're making decisions about what the landscape of your workplace is going to be, and what I mean by that is whether people are going to work remotely, whether you're going to have hybrid, or whether you're going to be calling people back in, there are different things that you need to consider. Sometimes a team or an organization works remotely because this is just the way that they're constructed. You know, the company footprint. When I worked for Lubrizol, a global company, we had also facilities in different locations. And so when we talked about remote, it wasn't necessarily people working from home, but they're remote from each other. They're working in different locations. And whether you're working in a satellite office or a subsidiary or a manufacturing facility, you still could be remote from the rest of your team, remote from your boss. And so a lot of what we talk about in the program still applies. And so that company footprint and where you're located really can drive a lot of the decisions around whether or not your work team should be remote. Obviously, safety protocols, which have been an issue definitely over the past, 15 months or so. Also cost savings. I mentioned my son, working remotely, or in the whole organization making that decision. Some organizations are finding that they invested a lot of money in real estate that they don't need to going forward. They don't need that same size space to get work done, and it's more efficient and cheaper for them to do that. And also, a lot of organizations invested quite a lot of money in this past year in technology to allow their workers to work at home. And so it doesn't make sense necessarily to then bring them back and to have lost out on that, the cost savings of that. The nature of the work. Some work it lends itself very well to working remotely, other work doesn't. And so as a leader, one of the things you think about are, what do people need to do? Where are the handoffs that need to happen? Is it important for people to interact with each other physically in the same room? Can they brainstorm effectively over Zoom? Can they manage the physical handoffs of the work that they do in a remote kind of setting? Is that something that's going to work? And as a leader, you need to think about that and involve your team and talk about what's been successful this past year. What has worked? What has not worked? How can we mitigate that? And so that's where sometimes those hybrid situations come in, because you might need to have situations where sometimes the team is together and sometimes they can work independently. And where we're seeing the biggest shift, because quite frankly, the first two, the organizationally driven and the nature of work, have been around for some time and making decisions about, whether people can work remote. But what we're seeing a lot more these days are decisions around the actual workforce and what people want and what people have learned. Now, my kids are both in their 20s, and when they were younger in the late 90s, early 2000s, if I wanted to work at home on a particular day, I had to really prove that I could do it successfully. I had to show that no ball would be dropped, no beat would be missed, that I would be able to get my job done effectively and be productive and working from home. Nowadays, people have proven that in the past year that they can do that successfully. And so employees are now much more likely to come to their boss and say, I've shown you I can do this, I want to continue doing it. They're finding that in many cases, the work-life balance is better because they don't have the same drive. They don't, the commute time in the morning. They're able to take a walk. They're able to be more productive because if you're someone who works well, maybe first thing in the morning versus midday versus night, you can balance your work with that. Sometimes, though, it shifts the other way, though, doesn't it? Sometimes if you're working at home and your computer is staring at you and you may think, well, it's raining outside, I can't go for a walk, I might as well just bring up my computer and do some work right now. And so different things can really impact that from the employee's perspective. And so as a leader and as organizations are going forward, they have to balance all of these things. And you might be in a situation where you're told this is what your workforce is going to look like. We want everybody back, or we found it works and we want everyone home. But it's important to be thinking about, what these different impacts are, especially if you're the one who can make the decision about your team. So I have a question for you. And this is a poll question Patrick will put up. Which of the following were the biggest factors that influenced what your landscape looks like of your current workforce? So you can think about, or you can choose more than one. Was your decision mostly organizationally driven? So it's, cost savings, where you're set up, what your organization has decided. Is it the nature of work, how people need to interact with each other, or the kind of things they have to do, if they physically have to be on site or not? Are they things where it's workforce driven? So employees have shown they really like it, they're more productive, they want to do this. Is it all of the above or something else? We'll give you a minute to vote on that.
Okay, just a few more seconds. Some votes are still coming in.
Okay.
Then I will show you the results. Okay, it looks like 56% voted that it was organizationally driven, 38% was the nature of the work, 25 was all of the above, 25% was all of the above, 13% was workforce driven, and 6% was something else.
Okay. Interesting. So it sounds like a lot of it has to do with, the organization, how you're set up and so forth. But it's interesting to see that other aspects are coming into it too, especially the low number that had to do with the workforce driven. And that'll be an interesting conversation for you as a leader with your employees, as a lot of organizations now are making decisions to bring people back or to work differently than we have been in this past year. So one of the things that we'll talk about in our webinar today, and that is a big focus of the overall program that we do, is the importance of understanding what your employees' needs are and putting them in the best place for success. So interesting. Okay, so our next thing that we want to talk about is, before we get into our content, is remote work is here to stay. This is another some survey results. This is from Upwork, and this was from late 2020. 94% of hiring managers report that their organizations use remote workers. 62% believe that their teams will be more remote than in pre-pandemic estimates, and 56% say remote work has functioned better than expected. So as a leader, it's important to understand what's going to be useful for your employees and what's going to help them be the most productive. I think what you'll find going forward, I don't think any of you would be on this call today if you didn't have a workforce that was either partially or fully remote. And so understanding that the workforce has said this works, leaders recognize that this is something that works, but how do you make it the best it can be? How do you take that remote aspect? You got people set up, they have the equipment they need, they're getting stuff done, but how do you make it sustainable? How do you make it so people feel the same energy, the same excitement to do what they're doing, and they get the most value out of their production in a remote setting? And so what we talk about quite a bit in our program is the focus on that team aspect of it. So there was two ways of looking at remote teams. You can begin with remote, or you can begin with teams. And my focus is on beginning with the team, because quite frankly, I think what we learned in this past year is we can get people to work remotely and we can get stuff done. But where you're going to be most effective is if you focus on having a really great team in place. And so our program on leading a remote team focuses on building the great team and what are those things that you need to do. And then we overlay that with how do you do that in a remote environment? So the dual benefit of that is you not only have a great remote team, but if your team is on site or you have a broader team and some are on site, you're going to have a strong team. So we focus on something, it's from Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He talks about 5 different areas that are essential to having a high-performing team. And what we do is then translate that into, as a leader of a remote team, what does that mean for you? So we talk a lot about trust. One of the biggest issues in having to do with having a remote team is the trust. You can't see people working. You can't always pick up on their body language. Because this particular webinar, you're not seeing camera, you can't see any of my body language. You can't see if I'm smiling, you can't see what I'm wearing, you can't see if I'm looking at the camera, you don't have that same connection. And so it's a real challenge to build trust. And Lencioni talks about with any team, trust is that absolute foundation. And so what we talk about in the program is how to build those elements of trust, why they're so important. And as a remote team leader, how do you ensure that you're building trust with your team and within your team? So they trust you, you trust them, and then within the team, you're also building that culture of trust. The second element that Lencioni says is absolutely vital, and it's something that can only be in place if that trust is there first, is healthy conflict. Now, there's always conflict. There's always times when a team is not going to get along, and there's conflict that can arise from disagreements, or I just don't like you, or we have a different approach. But this is about, as a leader, you need to get the best of your team. You need to innovate. You need to be always raising the bar. You need to be bringing in new ideas. You need to be thinking about what does the future look like. And when you're on a remote team, it's really challenging because people are often very polite. They're afraid of bringing up issues with each other. They might, so for example, when you're doing a webinar or you're having a conversation, they might be in the chat saying, can you believe what Molly's saying? I don't agree with that. Boy, you know, her idea doesn't make sense at all. And then the manager says, well, what do you think of the idea? And everyone's either quiet or maybe they nod, and manager says, okay, I guess we're fine, let's move on. And so what we talk about is how to have an environment where you can raise ideas, where you can talk about things, even when you're working remotely. How do you manage conflict? How do you work through that so all the ideas come to the table? From that comes commitment, because once you have healthy conflict, you have to have a path forward. And as a leader, you need to be able to pull together all those ideas and make sure that not only have those ideas come out, but that people are engaged to them, people are connected with them. People say, I'm bought into that, I want to move forward with that, I'm going to work towards that goal. And again, in a remote environment, you can understand where the challenge to that is even higher. And that's a challenge even when you're not working remotely. And so one of the things that we focus on, one of our modules, is around commitment and motivation and how you get people connected and working together and aligned towards the same goal. Then from that, once you have commitment, the next step that builds on that is accountability. And it's not just as a leader, you holding the team accountable, but it's building an environment through trust, healthy conflict, and commitment where the team holds each other accountable. Because you as a leader, I think something you've probably learned and seen in this past year is you're pulled in many different directions. You need to connect with each member of your team. You need to make sure everybody is doing what they need to be doing. You need to make sure that you're achieving your goals, you're keeping your boss happy, you're keeping your team happy, you're working with your peers. If you can create an environment where the team is accountable to one another, where they hold each other accountable, where they're working together because they trust, they can bring up ideas and have that healthy conflict, and they're aligned to the same goals, they're going to be more likely to hold each other accountable. And then finally, getting the results that you need to see and seeing results that actually matter, results that are going to take your team forward. And so we talk about the leadership aspect of accountability, defining what those results are you need to see, and how you as a leader in that remote environment can deal with things like, I don't know if that person's being productive. I tried to reach them. They didn't answer their text and their emails. Are they really at their computer working like they're supposed to be doing? What if they're outside? It's a beautiful day. And so how do you as a leader set the stage for what your expectations are to ensure that the employees are going to do what you need them to do? So all of these are challenging for any leader. But for a remote leader, there's that added layer of I can't see you. I'm not in contact with you directly. I don't know what's going on amongst team members if you're all getting along. And so what we talk about in this workshop is building that entire pyramid of what it takes to have a successful team, and then what that means as a remote leader. What does that look like for a remote leader? Now, one area we focus on in particular, and I'll talk about that one today. I chose one area to highlight for our conversation today, has to do with commitment, because motivation is a challenge, regardless of your situation as a leader, whether you're working remotely, everybody's together, or you're working in a hybrid kind of situation. Commitment, motivation, engagement, alignment, those are a challenge. And so we have another poll question for you. I'd like to see what your thoughts are on this. According to Gallup, now, I also want to set the record here too. This isn't just during COVID. This is just in general. So this isn't just employees working remotely or not remotely. This is just the workforce in general. What percentage of employees do you think are either not engaged or actively disengaged at work? So, and actively disengaged is, I know I'm not engaged and I'm not even trying, and I might even try to, disengage others. So what do you think? 26%, 38%, 50%, 77%, or 85%?
Okay, again, just a few more seconds because it looks like pretty much everybody has already voted. So I will go ahead and close it now.
Okay.
And looks like with 53%, it was 38%. Next at 18% is 77%. Then tied at 12% was 26 and 50%. And then only 6% voted that 85% were actively disengaged or actively disengaged.
So we only have 6% of very, very pessimistic people out there. So most people said 38%. Interestingly, unfortunately, it's a much higher number than you thought. It's 77%. Think about that. Think about the number of people that report to you today. If you have a team of 10, fully 7 to 8% of those people are either not engaged or actively disengaged. And think about what that might look like. Think about what the impact of that is on the work that you need to get done, on their job satisfaction, on your ability to align with the strategic goals of your organization if people really aren't engaged. And flip that around. Think about instead, I put that number out there to kind of, make you really think, but flip that around and think about, as a leader, what would it look like if they were engaged and if they were excited and they were committed to what needs to be done? And right now, if you're a remote leader, you're probably thinking like, okay, I've got that 7 out of 10 people. Do I know they're engaged? How do I know? I only talk with them a short time every day, or we only communicate on certain occasions, or maybe I've only communicated them with email. Do I know that they're engaged or not? I'm not in the room with them. I don't feel that energy, or that, I don't see all that body language to really know, is that person really connected as they need them to be? One other thing that I'd like to share that is either good news or bad news, depending upon how you look at it. I'm going to look at it as big news or as good news, but the impact a manager can have, or the variance that they're accountable for in this, is 70%. So a manager is accountable or can impact about 70% of whether or not an employee is really engaged at work. There's so many things you could do. That's why I showed that pyramid on the prior page, because if you create a high-performing team, if you work as a manager, and particularly as a remote manager, to build that trust, if you work as that manager to make sure that people can have conflict, that they can talk about things, that there's an environment where you can discuss those things that are really challenging, that you can challenge each other, that you can innovate and have different ideas, that you can commit to one of those ideas and move it forward and get people excited and motivated, hold each other accountable and achieve real, actionable, important, meaningful results, you're going to be that much more effective. So one of the things that we talk about when we talk about engagement is coming up with team norms. And what I mean by that is a group of behaviors, agreements, ways of working that will make the team effective, that they agree on, that we say, this is how we're going to do things. And it's an important part of that commitment piece. It's an important part of that engagement piece, because it's an opportunity for you as a leader to figure out what's important to your team and what are some of the things that we need to do in order to make sure that everybody is committed to a way forward. So some of the benefits, you get that individual ownership, that feeling I'm part of the team, that collective purpose. You get everybody on the same page. Because think about it, when you're working remotely, you don't have one of the benefits of working in a physical space together is somebody can pop their head in and say, hey, you brought this up in the meeting. Did you mean this versus that? Oh, okay, good. It's really hard to do that when you're working remotely. People don't want to bother you. They might feel more inclined to do it when they walk past your office or they see you walking past their office. But when you're working remotely, people are much less inclined to want to do that. And so getting norms about the way you're going to work together, the way you're going to communicate is important. It helps you avoid some of those hidden dysfunctions, particularly around conflict and trust. You're going to have a higher performing team, and it's a key element to helping you maximize the benefits and minimize the challenges of working on a remote team. Excuse me. And so when you have norms, they're usually around 3 particular areas. One of them has to do with how you communicate with each other. So it could be how often you communicate, the channels of communication you use. It could be like we only use email for this. If you have a disagreement with somebody, that you will always pick up the phone. So it could be when you communicate, that every Friday people will communicate and share certain messages with each other. You also have norms around coordination. What do your handoffs look like? How will you manage your processes? Who writes the processes? What will the processes look like? How we're going to work together on a team successfully to get the physical work done that needs to get done. But where norms can be particularly effective is around your culture. So when you think about that Lencioni pyramid of trust and conflict and commitment and so forth, it's about how we handle disagreements, that that while we're having a meeting, we're not texting each other saying, boy, can you believe what Molly just said? Or I don't agree with her, but I'm not going to tell her. That we don't do that. If we have a disagreement with someone, we bring it to them. If we have a conflict, that we air it out openly, that if we want to challenge something, we do it in a certain way. So having norms allows you as a leader to set, this is what I want that culture to look like, so that we can really be productive and that people are going to be connected. And one way in establishing norms, because if you think about it, if you moved from a on-site or in-person kind of work setting, and then you moved remote, a lot of those same norms may not apply. And so now that perhaps you've been doing it for the past year, or if you don't have norms altogether, what you can do is bring together your team. You know, have a working session together where you talk about what's been effective around communication, what hasn't been. What's been effective about coordination, what hasn't been. What should our culture be? What is going to make you excited to come to work? What's going to make you engaged? What's going to help you connect with your virtual teammates? You could have a situation, and this is particularly challenging. I've been on quite a few teams like this, where you have some people on site and some people working virtually. And so having norms for how you manage that type of situation. So it isn't always the people physically in the room who get the benefit of their access to you, or that they get to speak first in meetings, or that, you know, they get the prime plum projects and the people who are working virtually don't. And so as a leader, you want to understand and work with your team about what should your culture look like? How are you going to work together? How are you going to create that environment where people are going to be excited about, and I'm using air quotes, coming to work, because coming to work could just be walking across the hall from their bedroom. But getting people all excited about that. One area that we talk about a bit in the webinar that we do, the full webinar, is around meetings, because who doesn't love meetings, right? Whether you're in person or you're online. And meetings can be a wonderful opportunity to get people together to problem solve, to figure things out, to determine a way forward, to assign roles and accountabilities, and it can be a great thing. Meetings can also be absolutely horrible if you don't have the right people in the again, air quotes, room, if you don't have a purpose for them, and if they're not productive. And so if you think about it, when we first all started moving toward having a Zoom kind of presence with how we interacted with each other, the rule of thumb was kind of, over communicate, over include, get everybody on the call, have everybody have their camera on, have everybody contribute. Now's the time to kind of step back and be really purposeful and intentional. You don't want to over-engineer what you're doing, but at the same time, when you're having a meeting, are the right people included? Am I giving opportunities to both the people who are physically here and the people who are remote? How am I conducting those meetings so that everybody will be engaged and we can accomplish our purpose? So thinking about who should be there, what you want to accomplish, and why you want to do that. And again, one of the things, my two key words that I talk about in this program quite a bit are being intentional and purposeful. What do we want to get out of this? And thinking about those, broader benefits too. Maybe the team doesn't get to connect with each other very much, so part of your intention could be bringing people together for that. Also, one other thing before I go into some remote meeting tips is it's okay to just have meetings for let's just bring everybody together and chat and make it very loose. That when I say purposeful, that might be your purpose. So here are some tips for having good remote meetings. And I have this on the handout sheet that's available to you from the little widget there for the meeting that you can download. And you can think about where you might want to do some things differently with your team. So first of all, you want to think about, the cadence for your meetings, the timing. A lot of times, if you have people in different regions, that can be a real challenge, because I was on a global project once where we had people from all over the world. And so sometimes just to make sure that we could have people with Asia, Europe, and the US, and they were a long meeting, we had to be in our office on the phone at 6 in the morning. We had people in Europe, it was their midday, and then people in Asia were all through their evening. So thinking about like who your audience is for the meeting and how those time zones might impact things. Who needs to attend? Sometimes I've been on teams where if, maybe you have 10 people, but one person can't attend, and you say, oh, well, we'll just reschedule. And so determining what's your quorum. So if we have 8, that's fine. That's okay. And then rescheduling if you don't have the right number of people. One way to keep people engaged when you're having remote team meetings is to rotate some of the roles. So instead of you as the leader, or if you have an admin doing it for you, doing all the scheduling, or you do all the facilitation, or somebody does note taking, rotate it with different people. Benefits of that is if I'm supposed to be scribing, I've got to pay attention. So I can't necessarily be, I'm not going to be able to let my mind wander and play video games on my phone and turn my camera off if I'm supposed to be doing that. It also gives opportunities for people on the team. They might have some creative ideas about how to facilitate, or when to schedule it, or what the notes should look like. And so rotating the roles gives people opportunities to be involved and to take leadership and be creative. Have an agenda. And so a lot of times, if you were in a physical space together, if you walked into a room to have a meeting, I would guess that 99 times out of 100, you're not going to walk in and just sit down and say, go, we're starting a meeting now, boom, let's talk. You would say, hey, how was your weekend? Boy, it's beautiful outside today. Did I see you got a new car? But, you would be having a conversation with people, like your haircut. A lot of times when we're on calls, we don't do that. And so you could have different kind of warm-ups. Follow an EOS kind of process where you talk about an issue, have a discussion, and is it resolved? So having a specific formula for how you handle the different things that might come up in the meeting. Use of technology. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, at first, again, when we all started using Zoom, it was a focus on everybody had to have cameras on. Cameras are great for certain meetings, but not for everyone, because having your camera on all the time is very stressful, because you're looking at the camera and you're looking at your screen. You're not seeing everybody else too. You're seeing yourself too. And so that can be very stressful. And so think about, does it make sense that we require for this particular meeting to have cameras on? Maybe audio only is fine. Also, sometimes with everybody's camera on, it impacts the quality of the technology and people freeze more. So think about that. Think about making decisions about who facilitates and how you facilitate and how you engage people, how you invite dialogue versus just, does anybody have any questions? Going out and saying, Sue, we haven't heard from you. What are your thoughts on this? And so really taking that intentional way of engaging with other people. And if people know you're doing that even if their cameras are off, they're going to be more likely to pay attention because they know that you might ask a question. Meeting etiquette. Just like in a normal situation, you want to do that, but also thinking in terms of things like this. telling people to be careful not to be making loud noises around their microphone, to mute their microphone when they're not speaking, to give their full participation. If you have a blended group and you have some people in the room, making sure there are no side conversations. Actions, making sure people are taking notes, having norms about who is going to share the notes with people who are absent. And I'm sure you have some other thoughts as well about things that can make meetings effective. We talk about this in a little bit more detail in the program, but basically it's being intentional, but not so overly prescriptive, and getting the team involved in what's going to make a good meeting for them. So you as a leader don't have to decide everything. That's another one of our key principles in this program, is you don't have to decide everything. Involve your team as much as possible in creating that environment that's going to work for them, whether they're the ones who are in the room, the ones who are working in kind of that hybrid back and forth kind of situation, or somebody who's working remotely full time. We don't have time to go into this in detail today, but I'll do it kind of as a teaser. One of the other things that we talk about remote team meetings is really getting everyone fully to participate. And there are different things that can get in the way of that. One of them is the levels of trust and power. So if people don't trust each other, or if they're in a situation where there's different levels within the meeting of authority, what can happen is if the boss talks first, everybody else kind of shuts up and thinks, oh, it's been decided. And this is really exacerbated when you're on a remote team, because people aren't in the room. They can't ask you that question directly. They can't grab you in the hall after and ask you something. And so we break up into groups and talk about what are some things you can do if you have trust or power issues on the team. Also, introversion and extroversion. You probably may not know this, but it takes about 4 introverts to make up for 1 extrovert on a team. And you put that into a remote team meeting and somebody is just, dominating a virtual meeting, that can be a real challenge. And so what are some of the things you can do as a leader to make sure you hear every voice? It doesn't mean they have to talk at the same amount, but you hear every voice. Technology access and aptitude can be an issue because different people may have different access to it or not be comfortable talking in that kind of environment. And so what can you do as a leader around that? And then culture preferences. If you have a global team, and it might not even be global, it could be cultural preferences throughout the US or just people's own heritage, the way they prefer to communicate with each other. All of these things can impact the success of a virtual team meeting. And so we have some conversations about what are some things you can do as a leader to control that environment or to create the environment where everyone's going to be able to communicate and participate to their fullest. So as a kind of summary of what we talked about today, I gave you the foundation of what we build this remote team workshop around. It's how you build trust, healthy conflict, commitment, accountability, and results on a remote team. How you accomplish that when you're not all in the room together, and how you create that environment. And how you can also take those skills and ensure that your team is also effectively working together, even if you're not remote. Okay? So I'm going to turn back over to Patrick.
Okay, thanks, Molly. We did have some questions coming in. So first, what if you don't have a strong team going in, but you have to work remotely? Is it too late to create a high-performing team at that point? And can your team still be successful?
Right. Well, it's always best if you start off with a high-performing team, but it's not the end of the world, because if you focus on that Lencioni pyramid, starting from bottom to top, there are things you can do as a leader right away through the way you communicate with people, from connecting with them one-on-one and finding out what each individual person needs from you, from allowing yourself to be vulnerable as a leader and say, I made some mistakes, we need to step back and do this differently. So in thinking about how you can build trust as a leader, you can start doing that right away. It doesn't I won't say the change will happen overnight, but there are things you can do right away. And it will take some time, but as you build in these pieces and include your team and follow through on your commitments and really understand what their needs are and how you help them be successful, I think you can absolutely do some things that will move you in that direction.
Okay, great. Thank you. How do you manage the issue of perceived fairness when you have some employees that have to physically come into work because of the nature of their jobs and others who have the option to be fully or partially remote?
Yeah, this is a big issue. I hear about this a lot of times. And there's always, whether it's about working remote or something else, there's always issues of fairness. Somebody else got something, I didn't. And as a leader, you may be tempted to say, you know what, I'm bringing everybody into the office because I don't want to deal with that. I just, I want to make it easy. I'll just, make it fair. Now, I worked in HR, my whole career, and I used to say when I was creating programs is, you have to discriminate. You have to choose. You have to make decisions about, again, what is best for the organization, what is best for the work, and what is best for that person. And so my recommendation in that kind of situation is to work with each individual. So your work, Patrick, requires you to come in. You need to physically hand something to somebody. You need to build something. You need to be here because your job involves you physically interacting with a piece of equipment. What are some other things that would motivate you or get you excited? Maybe there's some sort of other benefit that I can give to you that maybe somebody else wouldn't get who's working remotely. So it's finding out what are those touch points that'll get that person engaged. There also could be, maybe I can allow you to work remotely certain days, or maybe I can let you do something with the flex schedule, or allow you to take lunch at a different time, or other things. It's interesting because if you think about it, there's benefits both ways. And so on the one hand, the person who's coming into the office all the time thinks, this isn't fair. They get to work at home in their pajamas and I've got to come in every day. There's also benefits to being in the office every day. People who are in the office, the physical office or work location every day, they have more access to the manager. Oftentimes, they're the ones who get a benefit of something because I see you, I'm going to say, hey, come here. I've got this great project I want you to work on. I can see you doing it. I have more comfort with you. So sometimes the person who's physically in the office actually gets more benefits. So bottom line, it's working with each person, helping them understand what the expectations are, what's going to get them excited about doing their work, and helping them understand too that it's choices on both sides. If you're sometimes just the nature of the work you're going to do is going to allow for one kind of environment versus the other, and what are some things you can do as a leader to provide the environment where they're going to be motivated? Because as a leader, you can't motivate people. What you can do is create an environment in which they'll be motivated. And you do that by listening to them, by understanding what's important to them, by partnering with them to figure out how can you create that so they can be as successful and engaged as possible.
Okay. What other kinds of team norms are really important to have on a remote team?
I think it's important. One of the things that I've seen the most, I think, has to do with, I'd say, conflict. And so on a remote team, if I'm unhappy with you, Patrick, if we're having a call and I'm unhappy with you, the temptation on a remote team is to just say, okay, the call's over. I'm going to go take a walk. I'm just going to let it go. And, I don't want to have to deal with having that conversation with you because it's hard to do over a video screen. It's hard to do over a phone. It doesn't seem worth the effort. I don't have to see you, so I don't cross paths with you every day, so I'm not going to feel your anger at me and so forth. And so people oftentimes ignore those situations and they let it go. And so having norms about how you're going to handle disagreements, how you're going to handle conflict, whether it's, I don't like your idea, I don't like your approach, I don't like what you said to me in that meeting, it didn't sit right with me. So all of those things, I think, are really important to have norms around how and when you're going to address conflict. And using it in a way that's going to help drive your team forward to success versus disrupting things or putting them under the rug.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. How do you get past the concerns about productivity if you can't see people actually doing the work?
Yeah, hopefully by now leaders have found that they're seeing that productivity and knowing that employees are actually doing what they need them to do. It's funny because you actually see this kind of thing in an office as well, or in a factory, anywhere. If you can't see the person doing it, when is a good leader isn't thinking in terms of, I want to stand over your shoulder and watch you do it, and I know it's done. Or so-and-so looks really busy, they must be productive. I mean, I'm sure every one of you has somebody in your work location who just always looks busy. They're running around, they look frantic all the time. And you're thinking, wow, that person must be really productive. Oftentimes that's a person who just knows how to look productive. They're or look busy or look aggravated, and they're probably not getting stuff done. And so in our the fourth module, we go over how to set expectations, how to be clear about what it is, the outcome. So it's focused on the result of what I need you to do. Because one of the best benefits of working remotely is that on a beautiful day like today, you can go for a walk in the middle of the day and then maybe do some work later. If you have an agreement with your boss that, you can do that. But one of the best benefits of allowing people to work remotely is just that, letting them work and be productive when they're going to be the most productive. It could be that they pull out their laptop tonight when they're watching the baseball game. It could be sometime over the weekend. And if you focus instead on what are the results I need you to see versus the flurry of activity I need to see, then you're probably going to get better results, and you're going to have that employee who's going to be more motivated and committed. Now, I say that with the under the stipulation that if they need to work collaboratively with someone else to do that process, you may need to put some guidance around that. But for the most part, it's focusing on outcomes versus the busy work or the busy looking kind of work you might see.
Okay, great. We did have a couple other comments thanking you for your great presentation today, and that you did a really good job, so appreciate that. But that does conclude our time together. So we would like to thank you for attending and encourage you to register for Molly's next program, which is leading a remote team on October 20th and 21st, and it will be delivered live via Zoom. And you can see the training or the registration link on your screen. If you do want to contact us to learn more about this and other offerings, you can call us at 330-672-3416, or you can email us at yourtrainingpartner@kent.edu. We can bring.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you. I really enjoyed doing this today.
Okay. Next slide. We can bring all of our programs to your organization, both live and virtually, and tailor them to fit your needs. You can join our extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar on Friday, June 18th, when we will be discussing motivating and engaging your employees with Kent State Facilitator Mike Rooney. You can see the registration link on your screen. During this webinar, we will explore how to recognize that we're all unique and understand the criticality of knowing your employees as individuals, be exposed to different frameworks for knowing your employees, learn how to motivate your employees beyond pay, gain a practical understanding of foundational motivational theory and its application in the workplace, and be able to leverage performance management in motivating your employees. Registration for that webinar will be opening soon. For those attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive a follow-up email early next week with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Kent State's Center for Corporate and Professional Development and our presenter, Molly Katz, thank you for attending today and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone.